Let me tell you a very different version of history. Whether there is any truth to it you'll have to decide for yourself. A long time ago, there was an alien race of beings whose planet was dying, so they stretched out across the cosmos in search of a mineral that could heal their planet. A blue fertile planet was discovered abundant in the mineral gold, which was key to their planet's survival. The planet Earth was inhabited by humans, a hunter-gatherer species still young in its development. The alien race called Anunnaki settled among the humans and introduced agriculture and society to the humans, building cities and birthing the first civilizations on Earth. It was Enki, the Anunnaki ruler, who sought to genetically manipulate human DNA to create a species more adept to performing the labor of mining gold. Some experiments created giants, cruel and monstrous. The hybrid children spawned from human mothers were used as miners for gold, while the hybrid children born of the Anunnaki mothers were given seats of high honor, and thus the first of the elite entered society. The calamity which struck Earth and destroyed this civilization led the Anunnaki to abandon Earth and leave their hybrid children, the elite, behind. Human and hybrid kind would survive the calamity, but the hybrid, elite, who lived much longer than humankind, used the secrets and knowledge of their alien kin to manipulate humankind throughout history and twist the very fabric of reality to suit their own aristocratical desires.
And because we took these stories as myth, we never saw it coming.
Who controls the world?
Well, I did a master's thesis back in 1991, Zane, and it was when the U.S. was planning the Gulf War. It was a 144-page thesis. I wanted to find out who owned the oil companies that were involved in the Middle East, and everybody knew Iraq was about oil. BP Amoco and Chevron Texaco were owned by the same banks. So then I thought, well, we better find out who owns the banks, because whoever owns the banks actually owns the oil companies. And these 8 families actually have 52% ownership. And those 8 families are Rothschild, Rockefeller, Goldman Sachs, Kuhn Loeb, Warburg, Lazard, Israel, Moses, Saif, and Lehman, which is now kind of merged with the Oppenheimer family interest.
Dean, what is the brief history of these families and their background?
Yeah, well, my research has these families. You can trace their lineage actually all the way back to Sumeria. The Sumerian clay tablets, which have been unearthed along the Tigris and Euphrates River Delta down by Basra in Iraq. At first they were just taken as these metaphors and this kind of crazy talk by the Sumerians, but Zechariah Sitchin came along and he began to translate these literally, and they told about these Anunnaki who came to Earth and occupied them and herded them into agriculture and began the cities of Ur and Babylon. And apparently some of these bloodlines from these families were part of this. They then moved to Egypt, sort of usurped the pyramids from the Moors who probably built them. The Sphinx, for example, was already there. They topped them off. These were probably free energy devices, actually, that people before were using. But before that, they stopped at the Roman Empire, and they were run out by the Moors out of Egypt. They fled to Spain, battled with the Moors again, ran them out, started the slave trade, eventually found their way to London, created the whole concept of credit, really. Up until that time, even the Christians banned usury. So they started the banking system, then they went around the world and they pilfered indigenous cultures, all the gold, the diamonds, the treasures, along with all of their spiritual knowledge of reality. And they used that wealth to build up the Roman Empire, and they became known as the Black Nobility. And this whole entity is really known as the Crown now.
Dean, how are these families able to control the web of power you just mentioned and described?
Well, the primary mechanism is the notion of private central banking. Again, our entire history as humankind, the Sumerian tablets talk about how they were forced into agriculture. Before that, we were all hunter and gatherers. There was no class system. There was certainly no bankers. But what happens when you go into agriculture, one farmer has a good crop, the other has a bad crop, so he borrows some wheat from the other farmer. Thus begins the rise of this banker relationship to the masses. And so they basically loan out money, get countries, entire nations, entire regions, individuals in debt. And then they use the money that comes in and they lend it out again at 10 times. We have, for example, in the United States with the Federal Reserve private banking cartel, the Treasury and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing even pay for the paper and the coinage. So they didn't even pay for that. You know, they just literally get this free right to issue money into the ether, and then building up the debt is how they keep control over the whole thing. The United States has a $24 trillion debt at this point. Right, 20 trillion of it is actually owed to these banking families. And they've done that to every country in the world. And they've by doing that, they can then impose austerity measures. And most of these austerity measures involve the handing over of real assets based on this phony debt, like land, like industries. And that's the other thing they do, is they manipulate the value of currencies according to what they need and from where.
This is not the beginning. This is the culmination of thousands of years worth of planning to take over the world. We don't have much time.